back. Now, I could tell you about my next guest, but easier to let him describe his 38-year career as one of the BBC's top cameramen. He says he visited over 100 countries, seen 5,000 dead bodies in a day, been bombed at, shot at, met presidents, prime ministers, tyrants and countless celebrities. He's worked with some of the corporation's finest correspondents and a few no-hopers like me. Well, as the world changed, so did the technology he was using at an extraordinary pace. We'll be speaking in just a moment to Bhasker Solanki, but first let's look at some of his work.
We'd been told of a massacre on this road, but nothing could have prepared us for what we saw next. Frankly, neither my cameraman nor I had the stomach to look in detail.
The first glimpse from the air is deceptive. There are only inklings of the earthquake's handiwork. A closer look reveals the true extent of devastation.
For these are Albania's forgotten children, victims of a ruthless communist dictatorship that deemed they should be kept out of sight and out of mind.
Oh, there he is, when his hair was all black. Now, Baz is here with me. It is absolutely extraordinary, the length of career. And I was just reading through the list earlier today. It just went on and on and on. I mean, if you have to think to yourself, well, what are the top 5 things? What would they be?
It's very difficult to count the top 5 things, but sort of some of the big ones are the Albanian children's crisis, the Rwandan refugee crisis, Somalian war, the Ethiopian-Eritrean war, the Gujarat earthquake, the tsunami, the Bosnian war, Tiananmen Square.
And then you can throw into the mix, I mean, you met Gaddafi, Assad, Mother Teresa. I mean, the list just goes on and on. You mentioned Rwanda. I was just reading the details of actually what you went through. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying, isn't it, when you look at the cholera that was there and also the capacity, what humans can do to other humans.
It was quite extraordinary. The precursor to the Rwanda, which happened in April '94, I was in Burundi with George Alagaya, and we found a petrol station, basically, a building which was part of the petrol station, where a head teacher had brought in his students there, told them to stay there, locked them up and set the building alight. So that was a Hutu-Tutsi fight as well. Moving on to April 1994, and the Rwandan massacre started, and we found the only way of getting in was fly to Burundi. We got a taxi, went to the border, and the taxi driver said he's not going to go across the border. So we literally borrowed the taxi, bought a visa at the border and drove in. And we were one of the first teams in. So we saw quite a lot in terms of what was going on in the streets. We met up with the government, and they agreed to take us into Kigali with an armed escort. And we managed to get sort of a checkpost where the militia were literally checking people, and if you were a Hutu or a Tutsi, you had to, they made a decision whether you lived or died.
That's an extraordinary thing to actually witness. I mean, when I was talking about the cholera, you were also seeing staggering numbers of people die every single day. When you're dealing with something on that scale, how can you film it, tell the story in a way that connects, that can make people actually understand that sort of scale of disaster?
Those numbers were just sheer numbers. It was everywhere you go, there were dead bodies, and what they were doing is wrapping them up in straw and putting them on the side of the road. So wherever you drove to or walked by, there were bodies on the side of the road. It is very difficult to explain the story through big numbers because you can't see the big numbers. So the only way you could do it is through individual people. Try and find them, try and talk to them.
And you did that in Gujarat with the earthquake, didn't you? Exactly that, which was in these terrible scenes with, again, so many numbers to find an individual. There we're seeing some of your pictures from the time. Just briefly tell us this story.
This was a city called Anjar, where 400 children were walking through the parade on the 26th of January. The earthquake happened, the buildings fell on them, and so that was in Anja. This particular shot now is in a place where there was a Russian rescue team which were helping a woman who spoke Gujarati. The Russian team could not communicate with her. I had a producer with me who spoke Russian, so there was a translation going from, because I spoke Gujarati, so we went from Gujarati to Russian to English and back again, and that's how we found out that she'd been in there for 4 days. She had no water or anything else. Her leg was trapped. I managed to get inside the hole to get the shots of her drinking some water, come out, and saw the rescue at the end of it.
And there eventually she gets out. I mean, you take us through it, and it was interesting when I asked you right at the beginning, they were all really, really difficult, horrifying stories that you listed as the ones that sprung to mind. But it's not all horror. I mean, you were there with William and Kate when they went to India and Bhutan. Was that their first trip to India?
There was their first trip to India, but I was there in India in 1997 and Pakistan when the Queen visited both countries, and that was a quite amazing trip. The Bhutan and India trip was just fascinating in terms of you don't often get a chance to go to Bhutan, but this was a place where you got into the inner sanctums of the royal palace itself, which was just normally the tourists are not allowed in there.
And let's talk technology, because I mentioned that in the introduction. You've brought some of, well, I'll let you explain, because it has changed from the start nearly 4 decades ago of your career. It's been an astonishing change in every capacity of how you film it, how you actually send a story.
When I started, the TV cameras, it took 4 people to lift the camera. Now the cameras have moved on. So they're still this size, but because they record on the same camera. So in the old days, so you had a big camera, and there was a thick 1-inch cable which went into the recording tape machine, and the tapes, videotapes were 1 inch high, 1 inch wide. The technology has now moved on, so I can record on a camera like this, transfer the material onto a laptop, transmit it to this sort of black box, which is called a WMT. This would have been roughly 400 kilos of baggage.
And the days where people like you and the correspondents were chartering planes to get their material back, that is all there now in that machine.
That's all in one thing.
So you record your story, you send your story from where you actually are.
I was in Burundi in 94, and we had to take some material from Rwanda into Burundi. That was the only way to go to the Burundi TV station to feed it from there. The only way we could do it was charter a plane, me on my own, fly across.
And there you are doing it. Just very briefly, I mentioned celebrities. You and Bill Hamilton became celebrities after your extraordinary coverage of Albania. We haven't got very long left. I mean, that was an extraordinary moment, because that was a country that simply the world had not seen.
In Albania, we found an orphanage where the children were sort of literally covered in their own excrement, no glass in the windows. We got involved in the fundraising as well. Sarah Ferguson got involved later on. And we stopped counting after £10 million, but subsequently the president gave us the Order of Mother Teresa, which also led on to an exclusive interview with Mother Teresa while she was there, because she's an Albanian descent.
Baz, we've run out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I've run out of time now. I haven't been able to tell the story of the dunderhead you worked with, which was me, who was given fresh fish by a fisherman, put it in his boot, drove it home, effectively smoked the fish and sold the car the very next week. Baz, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. We're back with more here in a moment. Don't go away.